Joe Biden came out of this presidential cycle as if he was king of blacks. And I use the term derisively because Joe Biden has gone so far as to say if you are black and you are voting or not voting for him, then you are not black. A white man telling other black people that they're not black because they're not voting for them, and somehow their status of African Americanness gets somehow revoked, and that he himself is the determining factor of who that is. It's appalling, but on top of it being appalling, Joe Biden is getting like 90-something% of black support, and that's not because of anything he is doing. That's entirely, to some degree, because he's not Donald Trump. You can look at the polling for yourself. The overwhelming majority of the people who are voting for Joe Biden are doing so because his name is not Donald Trump. And what that means is that this is not an aspirational message of this is what we want to put in that office because this person is going to do X or Y. It's more so that this person could be a ham sandwich and we will vote for it in order to stop and hold back Trump. I keep saying the question that needs to be delivered to Joe Biden every time Joe Biden comes to an interview is basically on the framing of the American public. If 88% of Democrats support Medicare for all, if 70% of the population support Medicare for all, how do you justify not supporting a policy if it will indeed organically bring together the party in a coalescing way to which you can beat Donald Trump in spades? Joe Biden is not asked that question, nor does Joe Biden even really have to get that question any real lip service because, again, he understands, his campaign understands, that the best thing that Joe Biden can do is stay in his basement and put out a comment here or there just to let people know he's still alive and has not necessarily been taken out by COVID-19. But from the standpoint of doing anything, the public has no expectations. We just need you to not be Trump. And that's a profoundly sad place to be as a society. We're at a point where the arc of history is begging to be bent in a particular direction. All of these people on the streets, a third of the population not being able to pay their rent for the month of July, 30 million people being out of a job. I mean, that's a significant percentage of your population not having ends to do basic things. That also means healthcare. Meaning, because our healthcare system is tethered to our jobs, those people who lost their jobs also, most likely in the millions, lost their healthcare. And this is in the middle of a pandemic. We have not equally dealt with this issue of the pandemic. And some of us are being more overtly affected than others. Some of those break down on class lines, but those things also break down on racial lines. You would think that a Democratic president, or a person who's running to be a Democratic president, that is within the context of this time period, with all of the stuff just basically on fire, with all of these people agitating and wanting something different, something to change, you would think that that person will step into the limelight and give an affirmative case for why they need to be in office, how they are the ones who's going to deal with all of these problems that are being presented with, being presented with as a country. But no. They also know that the more they talk, the more debates they get involved in, the greater the window or the greater the chance that the candidate can say something ridiculous, and that the pathway for him to shuffle through the doors of the White House is basically to shut up. That's a profoundly sad place to be as a country. It just is. Joe Biden has been supposedly working with Sanders on issues of a joint task force. Now, King of Blacks, Joe Biden, dealing with this issue of marijuana, has still come to the conclusion that marijuana should remain illegal, which means that the criminalization or putting people in prison in the various states that are black, Hispanic, or poor under Joe Biden will continue. That's exactly what that means. And again, you have no tether to Joe Biden once he gets into office for him to even do that much. This is Joe Biden. I want to play this first before we play anything else, just so you know where he stands. This is Joe Biden in the 80s.
During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else. I was a suburbanite kid who got a dose of exposure to what was happening to black Americans when I'm in my own city.
All right, so I play that so you have some context when you hear Joe Biden arguing that he is coming out of some kind of movement and some kind of, the black tradition or whatever. No, he does not. He was not, nor was he ever. Even though nobody brought this up during the primary, with the exception of myself, Joe Biden was flagrantly lying about this and using this lie as almost as a way to absolve himself of attacks by people saying these laws on pot are racist in the way that they are implemented or the way that they are prosecuted. Not just racist, classes in the way that they're prosecuted is by cops. Cop walks to your door. I think I smell pot in the car. Now I have all of a sudden have all sorts of permission to do whatever else I want, whether or not pot is in the car or not. It also goes to this notion of if you're not willing to get rid of this ruling, meaning this abolition of this, you have to abolish this particular law and make pot and work towards this notion of legalization, then even if you get rid of criminal penalties, you're still stuck with this notion of fines that disproportionately affect a certain demographic of race and disproportionately affects a certain demographic regarding class. Not to mention the rule set will be different depending upon which state you go into, despite this supposedly being a United States. I'm in one country, there's one law, I crossed the border, and now I'm being prosecuted and locked up for something, even though I'm in the same country. Joe Biden is failing on this issue. With 90-something% black support, the least that you could do is do things that are materially beneficial to the community. And one of those things would have been to legalize pot. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you for allowing me to do it. So Joe Biden is failing. Now, I would even make the argument to some degree flip-flopping, even though I don't think flip-flopping entirely applies, because basically Joe Biden wrote the crime bills. He wrote those laws. This is just who Joe Biden is in regards to his belief and his believing that this drug should not be legal. My point here is that the entire basis of the drug laws in the bricks was built to go after blacks. If I am right, and if the basis of this law was to go after blacks, and if King of Blacks, Joe Biden, is not willing to get rid of the legislation that has been used to criminalize black bodies and put those black bodies in cages, then he has failed on this issue. This is Joe Biden when he was asked about whether or not his position on pot.
First of all, we should decriminalize marijuana, and I've been pushing that for a while, period. Number one. Number two, medical marijuana should be approved. Number two. Number three, anyone convicted of a marijuana offense, past, present, or in the future, have the record wiped clean so that they can answer on any sworn affidavit they've never been arrested for a crime relating to marijuana. Number three, as you know, there are medical people who say we should study it more to make sure that there aren't other effects. It's not a gateway drug. It's not a gateway drug. We're studying more. I think science matters. And I would have the NIH looking and the CDC looking at it, but I think it is at the point where it has to be basically legalized.
It's at the point where it has to be basically legal. All right, fair enough. What does that mean? Now, there's a difference between decriminalization and legalization. If we're talking about decriminalization, basically, we're talking about removing it from the standpoint of let's say jail, that basically a cop who catches you with it can give you a fine, or based on the laws of any particular state, I would imagine the laws may differ. Decriminalization is the loosening of criminal penalties imposed for personal marijuana use, even though the manufacture and the sale of the substance remains illegal. Under decriminalization, both production and the sale of marijuana are unregulated by state. Those caught using the substance face criminal fines instead of criminal charges. Now, right now, we have what's called debtor prisons. Debtor prisons are supposed to be against our laws, even though those things still exist. You get a fine from a court. You can't pay that fine, oftentimes through issues of poverty, in which case the court penalizes you and puts you in jail for not being able to pay the fine to which they gave you. I could imagine something happening like that here. I also strongly imagine that if you are criminalizing or if you are giving fines, those fines are going to be very specific to who those fines go towards. And also, you have to trust that a man who's a flagrant liar is actually going to follow through, which you have nothing to push him to follow through on this one. Legalization is basically lifting or abolition or abolishment of the laws banning the possession and personal use of marijuana. This also allows stores to open and whatnot, regulations to come into place that would allow those particular stores to be regulated, not to mention tax money to go to the state or to the federal government for people who are using the substance. More importantly, at least to me, is this notion of who either currently gets put in prison over this or who those laws are often directed against, not to mention the entire point and the purpose of drug laws. Richard Nixon, crook Richard Nixon, has a henchman named Jamarl Ehrlichman. Now, Ehrlichman spent 18 months in prison for his role during Watergate. Now, in an interview, Ehrlichman, basically very candid, said, quote, "You want to know what this is really all about?" he asks with the bluntness of a man who, after public disgrace and a stretch in federal prison, had little left to protect. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either being against the war or black, but getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Of course we did. We knew we were lying about the drugs. My point is, those laws that were put into place by people like Joe Biden has basically criminalized blackness, going all the way back from the standpoint of the Nixon administration, had that very explicit point. You can destroy people's ability to vote. You can, like you said, vilify those people, have those people to be basically always underfoot of the law. Because if the law officer just makes an argument, "I thought I smelled pot in the car," then that stuff becomes fair game. Now, maybe there is pot in the car, maybe there's not. I'm just making the point that oftentimes it's used as a fig leaf in order to do things that are basically violating the rights of the citizenry. I've even heard lawmakers make the argument, what am I going to do? How am I going to be able to check these people's cars if we can't just say we smell pot in the car? I'm making a very basic point that if you're getting 90-something% support from blacks, and there is a law on the book that was explicitly written in order to criminalize and lock up blacks, then maybe your administration should be about more than just putting a black face in as a vice president and actually doing something that is to the beneficial end of those people who give you also all of that support. But instead, we get this. So Politico came back saying Sanders lost in his fight over trying to get drugs legalized, or trying to get Biden to vote on this issue. So right here, qualified, a legal doctor, right. But Biden appointees agreed only to sign on to the commitment to rein in the rule, talking about qualified immunity of cops. Basically, cops can't be civilly prosecuted. Progressives pushed to that end, but it was Biden appointees who agreed to sign on to commitment to rein in, whatever that means. Another flashpoint over marijuana in it. Similarly, Sanders' team argued in private meetings that they should legalize cannabis, but that idea was rejected. One task force member described the disagreements over qualified immunity and pot as huge battles, and multiple people involved said the criminal justice panel presented some of the biggest challenges for compromise. Whatever Biden told you, especially during the campaign season, you have to trust that a flagrant liar is going to actually push through with what he said. That's the first point. The second point, he's not going to legalize it, even under the best of aspirations. And Third point, in this very specific instance, Joe Biden is basically against this. And for a policy that explicitly was put on the books in order to criminalize blackness, and for him to be, quote unquote, king of blacks, at least that's what I've dubbed him, getting 90-something% support, that support should be or come with something that is beneficial to that particular community. And being criminalized is one of those things that's not. The least you could do as president would have been to legalize pot. The least. And again, this is another one of those issues where the majority of the public is for, the majority of Democrats is for, and your political instrument says, go fuck yourself. Are you not sick of that? And if you weren't in a situation of quote unquote blue no matter who, if you weren't in a situation of, okay, I vote for any random ham sandwich if that means getting Trump out of office, you realize you lose all sorts of power in that process the moment where you are willing to fold yourself into that bit of logic of I'm willing to vote for whoever, whatever, as long as their name is not Trump. And I don't care what they themselves are going to do in that office or whether or not what they're doing in that office is even to my liking. That needs to change. And until you get to the point of looking at your political space, not in this kind of narrow one singular election, but over the course of in the context of time, you'll be able to see, if you're looking at it that way, the momentum that has been going as your political space and a political opinion move further and decidedly to the right. Part and parcel to that is because each successive generation doesn't necessarily see the shift. But if you're looking at it over the context of time, it is obvious and it is clear. You basically have Democrats that are previous Republicans that are now in the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party has just moved that far to the right. I'll leave this here. If you're going to be king of blacks, I'm just making the point that needs to have something a little bit more to it than just a slogan. And it should be within the context of being willing to do things to ameliorate the conditions of the people in your society. And by the way, blacks may only make up 13% of the population. When we're talking about people who are being killed by cops or anything else, we're talking about a predominant or majority white. I'm just talking about a disproportionate share. Changes in laws like this are not just beneficial to one particular group, it's beneficial to the whole. I'm just making the point in the very specific framing of Joe Biden and the amount of support that he gets from African Americans to not be willing to go at this issue, something that is well within his powers, something that the majority of the public agrees on, and legalize pot. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.